Once there was a man who managed to raise the ire of just about every government on the planet, and also feminists alike. To which I simply respond, I like this guy. Good evening once again, everybody. This is Hell's Unicorn, once again doing a little late night opinion piece here. Yesterday in the news, it was put out that Julian Assange had lost his appeal against extradition to Sweden for what, in my opinion, are most likely trumped-up charges of sexual harassment and rape. I have long been of the opinion that the country of Sweden has become a place of absolute cultural decay to the point where a bunch of rabid, foaming-at-the-mouth women basically have the entire government of this country by the balls, and they are squeezing and squeezing what little testosterone is left in this once mighty Viking nation right out of its collective scrotum. Nevertheless, there is always the isolated possibility that this is true. I mean, Julian Assange, after all, is human like everybody else, and he is therefore liable to potential faults in character that can manifest themselves in a number of different ways. I am not asserting as a matter of fact that these charges are trumped up. It's simply my opinion based on experience that when somebody pisses off this many governments, charges are filed, regardless to whether or not they hold any merit. I had a conversation in lieu of this recent turn of events with a certain neocon who I'm not going to name. And the reason why I'm not going to name him is because I don't want increased traffic to his useless web page. Suffice to say, the conversation was not a very fruitful one. There was nothing meritorious said on his part. It was simply a bunch of meaningless bromides that were spewed at me without any knowledge of who I am and what it is I actually believe. It was simply an automatic Pavlovian response to one trait that I share in common with all of the groups that he instantly lumped me in with, in this case being the Democratic Party and the Occupy Wall Street movement. He actually, in one of his posts, accused me of saying that Sweden was conducting some sort of war on women similar to what the Republicans were waging currently. Yes, my friends, that is how idiotically deluded this individual was. Everybody who follows my channels know that I am a very staunch anti-feminist. I am basically flirting with the idea of becoming an MRA. I have stated many times that I detest feminism, and in my post it specifically states that I concur with Julian Assange's sentiments regarding feminism in Sweden, it is a feminist wasteland, which states mainly that the country has been rendered a cultural wasteland because of feminism. I concur with him on that, but this bonehead can't get it through his thick skull that a person can be anti-feminist and also anti-totalitarian government, because that's evidently what he is supporting. The only reason to hate Julian Assange is because he has leaked information that is damaging to the United States government and to other governments in the world. Now, forgive me for being a little bit too logical in these things, but I've been always of the opinion that if you are for smaller government, it logically follows that you believe that in a consistent fashion. Problem is, with the rank-and-file neocon, this is not the case. The neocon believes in large government in practice, just small government in theory. Never gets beyond the theoretical stages, so to speak. Rather, believing in small government is more sort of a platitude that it's a bit of sloganeering that's just sort of thrown out there to identify somebody as a group with a particular label, a catchphrase, if you will. If this person had been smart enough to visit my channel before running his mouth, he would have learned that, number one, I am very strongly anti-feminist, as I stated before. Number two, I am very strongly anti-Occupy Wall Street. Under no circumstance whatsoever have I ever identified as being tied in with them. Now, some people in the Occupy Wall Street movement or the Occupy movement at large are Ron Paul supporters, and I concur with them on that. But when it comes to a lot of that economic stuff that was being thrown around and all the cult chanting and all that crap, I wanted as much distance between myself and that as possible right when it was getting started. If he had gone through my videos before running his mouth, he would have seen 2 or 3 videos of me mocking the Wall Street movement as nothing more than a bunch of unwashed barbarians, basically living in tents rather than doing something proactive like actually going after the people that were responsible for the economic calamity that they claimed to be so aware of. I've come to understand that, to an extent, ideological persuasion is informed by a type of intellectual laziness. I identify myself as a libertarian just so it makes it easier for people to understand where it is I stand on given key issues. But with that comes the assumption that people who hear that term understand that there are nuances, there are different schools of thought within this broader term, and I think I was assuming a little too much to a degree. So I think I need to re-examine exactly how I put myself across so that this kind of crap is cut down upon. I think that this particular person probably would have still been stupid and would have said this stuff anyway because he revels in being stupid, but I don't know. Maybe identifying myself just as a libertarian isn't really sufficient to explain what it is I believe and why I believe it. This particular individual is symptomatic of, I think, a larger problem that's currently going on in the so-called political dialectic that's been going on YouTube, which is people take one tiny little sliver of an issue and blow it up into a template of viewpoints that has to apply to everybody. And it's always a broad-based one. It's very simple-minded, and it's just projected outward towards everybody who doesn't immediately confess God, country, and honor, and not in that order. Honor and country comes way before God with most of these people. A lot of these people, I question whether or not they even are Christians or whether they even go to church. That's probably just some crap that they picked up from the politicians that use that kind of sloganeering to rope in people down in the Bible Belt. Nevertheless, there's something within the original story that I kind of wanted to touch upon, because I know there are people that are subscribed to me that are not really sympathetic towards Julian Assange. And from an ideological perspective, I mean, I don't have any sympathy for the guy. What I have sympathy for him for is the fact that he did something that I think needs to be done on a more often basis by much more media people. And technically, this guy isn't even media. He's not a journalist. I would argue that's the reason why he's honest, because he never went to school to be a journalist. That's where you learn how to lie and be professional about it. He exposed a lot of information that I think every citizen of every nation in this world should be privy to before making decisions about who they vote for. The whole reason why I've kind of flirted with the idea that maybe voting is unto itself an act of violence is primarily because right after people vote, there's a lot of violence done to other people's persons and property. Woo, wait a second. I think that protecting people's rights and their property is paramount. Ooh, I must be a real Occupy Wall Street socialistic left-winger extremist for believing that now, huh? The truth is that for all of this talk about how big of a left-winger Julian Assange is, I've never heard anything about what the guy thinks regarding size of government, central banking, monetary policy, civil liberties. The only thing I've got from the guy is foreign policy. And, foreign policy, the whole idea of opposing what America is doing as far as foreign policy goes, that encompasses a lot of very different viewpoints. And even within the libertarian spectrum, there's a lot of different viewpoints. Some of them don't even conform to the very strongly anti-war mentality that most of the Ron Paul crowd tends to have and what I tend to have. it's just something that I think people should think about, because a lot of times people don't think. They simply speak first and then think about it later. And by the time they start thinking about it, you've already alienated the person and the conversation has been completely prejudiced and it can't move forward. Now, even though I don't suffer the company of brainless idiots, if they say something that is parallel to my own viewpoint regarding a certain subject, I'm not going to suddenly change my mind and hold a different view because that ignorant fool held that viewpoint. I will stick to that viewpoint so long as I think that it is rational and it has something beneficial to offer the conversation. And that's the mentality that I think all of us should have. I'm not going to suddenly become a war hawk just because Al Gore thinks that the Iraq War was a bad idea, even though I utterly detest Al Gore. I detest most politicians. That's the thing that people can't seem to get past. They assume that because you hate one, you like the other, or that you like somebody on one thing, you immediately like everything else that he believes. And that's not the case. I don't know enough about Julian Assange to say whether or not he's a model person or a model ideologue to follow when it comes to things such as tax policy, abortion policy, civil liberties, anything like that. I'm just stating that I happen to agree with him when it comes to exposing government secrets. I don't think governments have the right to hold anything in secret. That defeats the whole purpose. If something is by nature public, it is open to anybody. And I believe that all information, all data, every little piece, every little thread of the spider web that is potential knowledge is accessible by anyone. Your average Joe Schmo in Maine or in Texas should be able to know whether or not there is some sort of trumped up strategy to get into Iran in order to affect some sort of political policy that doesn't immediately involve the best interests of this nation. I think everybody should know that before they vote for the asshole that may or may not actually follow through on that. I think it's a rational viewpoint, but there's a lot of neocons out there that thinks that I'm some kind of terrorist and that I'm going to kill everybody. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for people to be imagining me walking around in a turban shouting Allah Akbar. I mean, my skin's too pale for that nonsense to begin with. So anyway, feel free to talk amongst yourselves. Let me know what you think on this particular issue. Do you think Julian Assange should be extradited to Sweden so he should face these charges, or do you think it's all a bunch of BS and the guy shouldn't be extradited? Personally, I think that if Julian Assange was smart, he would hightail it down to Brazil. And Brazil never extradites to the United States, and I don't think they regularly extradite to other countries either. And if Brazil were to try to extradite him to Sweden, I would simply use the argument that if they extradite him to Sweden, the Swedes might hand him over to America. Stranger things have happened. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.